Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Phoenix Guide to Dungeon Runs. Kaz here, and today we'll be attempting Ascension in the appropriately named Spires of Ascension. As always, these dungeons are in beta, and they could change on release. Up, and away! The Spires of Ascension are currently under siege by the Forsworn as their self-appointed Paragon attempts to wrest control of the Spear of Kyrian from the Firstborn. It's your job to make sure that doesn't happen, because despite most of our average lifespans being 4 expansions ago, we're still making loot rolls. As a heads up, interrupts, anything similar to anti-magic shield, and healing is big on the trash here. The bosses themselves aren't incredibly terrible, but they really seem to go all out on the trash packs between bosses here. Your first target is Kintara, the rear guard of the advancing Kyrian force, and her companion, Azul's. Tanks need to make sure the boss is facing away from the party as she casts Overhead Slash once her energy reaches 100, dealing damage in a large frontal cone. Tanks also be aware Azul's does not have a threat table and will randomly aggro party members while casting Attenuated Barrage. This is a front-facing ability that inflicts massive arcane damage if you aren't careful. Dark Lance is another boss ability that randomly targets a player and inflicts an arcane dot for 10 seconds. This doesn't hit too hard, but it can be painful if your healers aren't careful. The big ability that you won't see due to every cooldown in the book being blown is Flight. During Flight, the boss takes into the air and launches spears at players, dealing pretty hefty damage and leaving a zone that inflicts noticeable damage as well as slowing anyone caught inside. The easiest way around this is just avoid any swirlies on the ground and make sure to stay away from the charged zones. Another thing to note is if one enemy dies, the other one enrages, supercharging their abilities and increasing damage done, so ideally you want them both to die roughly the same time. But in the event that you should see this, key things are Kintara will throw those charged spears on the ground instead of just in the air, and Azul's will launch even more missiles that leave pools of heavy damage on the ground. Our second boss, Ventanax, is a corrupted Praetorian designed to move so quick you won't even see her coming. Darkstride moves the boss behind a random player, inflicting a noticeable bleed on her target, as well as leaving behind a Shadow Whirl. Now these Shadow Whirls will periodically launch dark bolts at players, inflicting damage and knocking the players up for a moment if they touch. Worth noting is if Ventanax recharges, these whirls will emit bursts of bolts as opposed to the one at a time. Blinding Flash is a frontal cone that stuns and blinds players for 3 seconds if caught. Ideally, you'll either have your tank face the boss away from the party to make sure it's easier for them, or have the party just move when she begins casting if they're in front of her, hoping no one else is struck. Mentioned earlier, but not seen, is Recharge. The boss will channel her energy, restoring it completely over 10 seconds, and causing any Shadow Whirls on the field to burst with constant bolts while she is empowering herself. Oriferian is our next target, a dark colossus tasked with guarding the font of power and ensuring no one interrupts its creator's attempted coup. Purifying Blast is the first ability seen, targeting a random player and dealing arcane damage on impact and applying a dot to anyone near the zone. Just watch for the swirly and you're good here. Charge Stomp almost always follows the blast and deals arcane damage to anyone near the target and applying a 30% slow to target's hit. Imperial Ordnance launches Anima at players, dealing massive damage to anyone near the impact zones and leaving an Anima field behind. The fields reduce the haste of anyone inside by 20% and inflicts light arcane damage. If the boss is inside one of these fields, he deals 20% more damage and will freely cast Anima abilities. Recharge Anima is an ability you won't see very much of. The boss locks up and channels, regenerating 5 Anima every second. On top of this, the Anima fields coalesce and become targets. Should the fight last this long, you'll want to target the coalesced Anima down as quickly as possible, because if any reach the boss, they explode and deal hefty damage to the party. Touching them also causes a much smaller explosion to anyone within 5 yards, so have your ranged DPS target them down, or separate your melee and make sure they aren't chasing the same ones. Finally, face to face with the Forsworn Paragon and her evil schemes, it's time to put this to rest. Tanks, make sure you face her away from the party because of Run Through, where the boss will charge forward and deal hefty damage to anyone in her path. At certain health percentages, the boss will activate the Anima Conduit, dealing massive damage to all players and causing several things to happen. The first thing to mention is the wind that can push and pull players and Anima to the ledge or back end of the platform. It isn't especially rough, but the longer this phase lasts, the more stacks of Lingering Doubt you'll have to deal with. Lingering Doubt starts out as a light arcane dot, but can stack and reach some very painful numbers if you aren't careful and pretty quick here. The idea for this phase is to quickly pick up the anima floating around the platform and bring it back to the spear, powering it up for a big attack. Once the anima has been deposited, you can click on the spear, which puts you in one of those wacky cursor targeting interactions where you'll need to aim the spear towards the edge of the platform at Davos and hit her, inflicting 10% of her total health and forcing her back to the platform. A couple abilities not seen in the video are Abyssal Detonation, which creates a zone of Maw anima that explodes and deals absolutely insane amounts of arcane damage to anyone within 10 yards, and the other being Lost Confidence. Lost Confidence inflicts a random player with an arcane dot for 15 seconds. If the spell ends or it's dispelled, it leaves a pull at their feet that applies Lingering Dot, the same dot that has been going on this entire time. Once the Paragon is slain, the Firstborn congratulates and thanks you, giving a big speech on mortal interaction that only serves to give you time to check out your loot before moving on to the next dungeon. As always, these dungeons are still in beta, and they could change upon release. Good luck, and happy hunting.